Hey, Miles.
Hey, Sarbjeet, how you doing?
Good, good. I'm glad we connected finally to do this live meeting. We have met a couple of times
Yeah,
during the Google Cloud event and doing karaoke and whatnot. So
yeah,
it was fun.
yeah. We had a good time. Next is it has been a long run of good connections between technologists and business folks and analysts, and everybody's trying to figure this space out. So, it
Yeah.
was,
To be more specific, Google Next. Yeah, we were there. It was great. Let's talk about the stuff we are scheduled to talk about: multi-cloud,
sure.
cloud economics, the strategy, cloud strategy for enterprises on one end, and cloud strategy from the supplier side, from the hyperscalers, how they are approaching it. What's your take on after hearing Google Cloud Next and Microsoft Ignite and now reInvent, right? What's your take on the industry as whole? Where we are? Are we rationalizing the cloud spend? Are we still pushing sort of ahead with the developer focus? What's happening?
I mean, I've been an advocate, and having worked at Amazon and at Google from the first party for a long time, that the operators are the ones that are actually making the end implementation choices that boss around the majority of cloud spend worldwide. It has long been a place where I think if you have been a long time software developer, you maybe have been frustrated by your operations people and got this little taste of freedom with public cloud infrastructure. Yeah, I can kind of stand something else of my own, but it all takes all of about 9 seconds for you to go, well, right. I mean, I stood it up the one time, but now I don't want to do operations. The operations people do that part. Yay. And you offload those responsibilities as quickly as you can. I think in practice, in businesses at any kind of normal scale, the hundreds of millions, billions of dollars in cloud accounts are all being driven by the operational requirements of those systems. And those requirements are cost centered, are risk oriented, are compatibility and interoperability oriented. And so the discussion of multi cloud is really a pragmatic one, right? I know very few businesses that would say, I have a crystal clear strategy. I'm only ever going to use one vendor for all my technical stuff forever. It's going to work awesome. I'm just only buy Microsoft phones and I'll only buy Microsoft cars and I'll only buy my no, it doesn't work. Like no one vendor has a complete stack for all stuff. So you're going to end up making them work together. Just sort of kind of seems inevitable. It's just sort of the deal.
Yeah, so multi-cloud is kind of almost equal to multi-vendor, and multi-vendor is a risk
Well,
mitigation
when you're
strategy.
hauling so much investment out of the infrastructure space in private environments into the public environments where those dollars are now being spent, if you're going to chase around after innovation and try to buy innovation as a product from companies, the innovation's happening in the cloud providers. So that's where you've got to run. I think you're kind of nuts if you're standing up a brand new square data center today. So that if that's the direction that you've got to go to get your hands on innovation, then you've got to be at least someplace in the cloud.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Actually, I'm a big pro cloud guy for last 10 plus years, and as of recent, I have this sort of thinking frame which I have distilled into like one sentence: innovation favors scale. And cloud folks have scale, they're hyperscalers, and innovation dollars are going there. They're, TPUs, DPUs, XPUs, you can call it, right? So we're bringing compute to the storage, compute to the network, NIC cards, and so that the CPU, which we think should just focus on the application logic or the speed, it should dedicate all the speed to the compute, if you will, compute, not the storage related compute and or network related compute cycles. What we end up spending traditionally, we have been doing that. So we're trying to build like specific hardware to handle the scale, if you will, and it
And we
gives you
live in
economics.
Yeah, and anytime you do something more frequently, it is going to earn you returns when you make an
Yes.
investment in increasing the efficiency of doing that thing. And there are some things now that cloud providers are doing quadrillions of times. So it's going to make sense for them to go to all the way to dedicated ASIC hardware that specifically does that function in solid state silicon to be able to execute it at the lowest possible marginal cost. I think over time you can imagine all sorts of crazy shit, WordPress on a chip, and you're going to end up getting to a spot where a lot of these functions are operated frequently enough that it makes sense to have hardware to embody them. But we're at this kind of middle layer where as the CPU explodes out and there's a bunch of different subcomponents to accelerate the workflows that are happening much more frequently than just sort of integer logic that's required to run normal software, you're going to get to a spot where there's all kinds of competition at that hardware level. And of course, yes, the big folks are going to learn about this earlier. That's been one of Google's biggest advantages, is having it such a huge problem to try and tackle so early in the market that it had to build a bunch of this scale-based innovation. So there's a lot where I think as a buyer, as a consumer, you're trying to figure out how to be a productive remora on the side of these big sharks and find out a way to capture your momentum and your innovative edge in your market without having to invest in a whole freaking shark, right? Because they're catastrophically expensive. These things are billions and billions of dollars that they spend.
Yeah, definitely. Of course, Google had scale for a long time, and even before the Amazon started with the cloud, they had that sort of scale. To crawl the web, you need to digest the web, right? To make the search work. We all know that the Kubernetes came from there. They use huge amount of compute, billions of containers every week they launched.
Sure.
I mean, I heard that figure. 4 billion containers every month or so, whatever that number was, it was huge. I heard that 3-4 years back. And of course, they know how to run compute at scale and design their own servers and cooling
Sure.
mechanisms and all that, right? So it just goes into the economics of running.
Well, and that is
operations.
increasingly true for the three big hyperscalers, right? Each of them have their own hardware divisions and partnerships that structure those divisions. But I think you are certainly seeing that is happening at the expense of that innovation happening in sort of individual smaller ISVs, right? Like you don't get nearly the level of competitive pressure from sort of smaller hardware shops or smaller software shops in comparison to the revenue juggernauts that are the big hyperscale clouds. So more and more of our customers, at least I work at Sada, we're responsible for about 2,600 customers now. They're continuing to buy sort of in line with the hyperscale providers. What do they offer? What's in their ecosystem? What are in their marketplaces? How do I combine this all together? And that's, I think, going to be a big driver of multi-cloud adoption going forward, is not just that I have to sort of figure out how to consume the hyperscalers themselves, but the only efficient and viable way to buy all the rest of the software that I need is through the hyperscaler. They're the ones who have the billing console figured out. They got the chargeback model figured out. They got the group negotiation worked out. So the economics are going to drive consolidation there, I think.
Yeah, on that note, there are a few things which the keywords you mentioned, the ISVs, right? And from there, my mind goes into like, okay, the way the ISVs will consume the cloud versus the way a typical enterprise, which is not an ISV, will consume the cloud. There are different sort of mechanisms, or they value different things, if you will. That's one thing. And economics of the marketplaces, marketplace-based, consumption of computing, if you will, that has huge sort of implications for the whole industry. And the supplier rating systems were, I always had that gripe about our industry that there's no supplier rating system. Now having the marketplaces, it gives you some sort of peace of mind that if you are getting something from that marketplace, it's vetted to a certain extent.
Well, you also have, this is about store shelves, right? Retailers figured this stuff out a long time ago. When I go to the gas station and I fill up the car, the only brands of candy bars that I buy are the ones that are in the gas station lobby. That's, if you're not in that lobby, I don't buy your candy bar, because the only reason I stopped is to come and get gas. So if you're already negotiating, $100 million, $1 billion committed consumption contract with a hyperscale cloud provider, and they will allow you to co-buy software from ISVs through their marketplaces, let me give you a hint. That's where it is you're going to buy your software, because boy, oh boy, it's nice to negotiate that discount all at one time. So there's huge forcing functions for the buy side to simplify procurement and reduce contractual friction and make it, my little company, we have 380 different pieces of SaaS software that we consume. I promise you, the big enterprises out there can stick a zero on the end of that number, and they don't like it. They don't want 3,000 different contracts. They don't want 3,000 different SLAs or terms of service or, indemnification clauses. It's ridiculous, right? So being able to get that stuff siloed into a provider is important. If you're an ISV, that means you have to be on all three clouds, because they make it a requirement for you to participate in the marketplace. You can't even be listed in the marketplace if you don't run there. So when Amazon says, we're not going to do as much work to enable an easy to use system that lets you run across all three clouds, they're just telling every ISV, your problems are unimportant to us. We are uninterested in supporting your go-to-market with what are more than the majority of channels. Amazon today is not the majority of infrastructure sales. The whole market is bigger than them as a single provider. So if you're not also in the Azure store and also in the Google store, you're just deciding you don't like customers.
Yeah, actually, you have to admit that they started early. They have that, advantage, and these.
I was there doing it. Right, I was in the first 120. We were telling people you could use EC2 instances for things other than websites, right? We were extremely early in that cycle, and they earned their market position. I think the whole rest of the market was too slow to adopt an operations orientation, to adopt the compatibility with open source software, which has been such a dominant driver of consumption in the public cloud. So they learned those lessons early, and they have earned this outsized market share that they enjoy. They're just watching that position erode as they have not extended that lead. Right? Like, if you had that much lead, wouldn't you use it to try and get further ahead? If Google started when I started at GCP at 1,000th of AWS revenue, and now it's more than a quarter, I don't know. That's a lot of catching up. if I'm Jassy or Solipsky, I'm pissed.
Oh yeah. No, actually, as a neutral kind of party, I want Google to be bigger and better. I want Microsoft to be a good competitor. That's where the sort of market-based pricing will come from. That's where the margins will be squeezed. That means the buyers will benefit. So for buyers to benefit, we need good competition. We need multiple players at par with the leader almost, so not in very distant sort of second or third, right? It's for our advantage as an industry overall.
That's right.
To have healthy competition, definitely.
And different buyers are going to be at different phases of maturity, right? If you're a small, medium business, your growth rate is 5, 6, 7% a year. I promise you, being on a single cloud provider is going to work out great. You should dive in and weld yourself to that thing and lock yourself in as hard as you possibly can. If you can be so successful as to get to double-digit and triple-digit a year growth rates, and make it so that the problem is you have to figure out how to extricate yourself from some of these entanglements, fantastic. It's like a success disaster. You've hit the home run. These are the smallest of your problems. I think the big businesses can't avoid being in all of them, either by acquisition, by partnership, by where their software has to live. So that's just sort of this inevitable outcome. And all of the investment that's being made in lowering the barrier to entry helps both of those groups be able to use the products that they're trying to consume more easily. It's too hard still, and all of the interop just makes it easier for everybody.
Yeah, definitely. The interoperability it's a huge sort of topic in itself. Like, how do you make these bigger clouds interoperate with each other's? And there's likes of HashiCorp and many other mechanisms. We had older mechanisms, Chef Puppet, and then from there we went to the Ansible and HashiCorp's sort of tech stack, if you will. You guys are trying at Google, like, when I say you, Google is trying to be.
I'll take the compliment. The Google guys are nice.
Multi-cloud friendly vendor. And this year, actually, first time, Splinsky said that we will be hearing more multi-cloud from them. We didn't hear much during this whole reinvent after that sort of one time, but hopefully they will be doing some work in that arena. But shed some light on the multi-cloud work from the Google side.
Well, I mean, I think the most basic of the building blocks in Kubernetes is the foundation for a thriving material product and revenue source for all three of the cloud providers. AKS and EKS are successful businesses. I think it was the first of Amazon's attempts to be a software-based multi-cloud provider when they did EKS Anywhere. I haven't seen very much adoption of that in practice. They have, I think, spent a lot more focus on the outpost strategy and shipping boxes to customers, which I think feels a little regressive. But the structure and the engagement from the Amazon development community in the open source Kubernetes practice is if not massive, is certainly there. Is it there? Absolutely a presence, and they participate in the steering committee, and they've got code contributions that are there. I think Google outnumbers them 10, 15 to 1, something like that. But even inside of the Kubernetes project, we're talking about just one of the primitives, right? Like you were talking about the kinds of accelerators that exist. Yep, there's compute and there's networking and there's storage. Like those are three big buckets, and Kubernetes is pretty predominantly focused on the compute one. And it's sort of halfway with networking, Istio, and some of the extensions to the Envoy proxy and some other approaches that are being taken now are setting up for networking to start to feel that way. But we're at about where Kubernetes was 5-6 years ago in the networking layer. There really isn't structural interop between the cloud providers and the rest. And storage is worse. Like storage is much worse. It's like dimensionally worse, right? And a whole bunch of the places where I think the cloud providers wrote a love letter to the operations people with saying, I know the part that sucks the most for you is scaled storage. So we'll take that part, right? I mean, EC2 was kind of an amazing product and everybody dug it, but S3 changed the world, right? Yeah. It's better than EC2 by a lot. So DynamoDB is better, BigQuery is better, Cloud SQL, RDS, those are hugely important products. And I think it's the transition of those products and the management layer that the cloud providers can deliver into something that is available in remote targets, in remote locations. That's going to be the big game changer in terms of consumption dynamics. Because until you have the ability to have state replicated for your applications, for your services, the design work gets real hard and real pesky, and that's when the rubber hits the road. Like if you're a stateless service, eats it, and you relaunch it someplace else, it's kind of like, okay, I guess it still works. Once you start deleting customers' data, it gets bad real fast.
My mind is going into several different directions as you speak. The whole goal, like the compute was always ahead of the game from those three buckets. Sure. Then is storage, and then it was network. A network is storage, like something back and forth sometimes. Like network gets ahead, but these are most inefficient subsystems of the sort of computing world, if you will. Those two are after compute. Compute actually, by the way, overall, our goal has been to reduce the waste or make our workloads like fit densely into the infrastructure we have, so we are not wasting storage, we are not wasting compute, we're not wasting network bandwidth, and we are just utilizing it to the maximum extent.
Right. And you can tell by the things that people celebrate the win on, right? Like I remember reading a bunch of stuff from the CERN folks as they're working on like LHC, macro scale, high performance computing. And they're like, oh, we got another 0.5% out of this sorting algorithm. And they're like, yeah, hell yes. And then you like go and look at ScyllaDB working on the Cassandra code base, rewriting it in C, and it's 10 times faster. You go like, okay, so in the storage world, there are still like 10x, 100x, huge many X changes in the performance efficiency. We have a bunch of customers that went from Hadoop and into BigQuery or into some other columnar store where it's 10x, 50x, 100x differences. So storage land still has those just complete home runs that are left to be able to optimize the workloads that we have for the infrastructure's utilization pattern.
Even though, I was going there, even though the compute seems like we are almost done with the innovation on the compute side, but there's a lot of wastage in the container world as well. I think the most dense, and as a developer, actually, at heart, I am the most dense or most efficient way to consume compute is the function as a service. That's what I seriously.
It's most efficient for you, the developer, because you get to pay for it by your utilization. Now, I wonder if you want to hang out with the operations team at Amazon or the operations team at Google that runs cloud functions or the operations team at Azure. I bet you they have an incredible amount of unused compute, because they have to handle all the spikes and all the burstiness and all the weirdness of every one of their customers in aggregate. So it's about the shift of risk. I don't think the function model actually reduced the amount of computation that gets consumed as a function of the work. I think it made it easier for the developers to consume. And that's a shift as opposed to an actual reduction in increasing the efficiency. I think a bunch of the stuff that's happening in AI modeled coding and the GPT model for code analysis and all the code review stuff that's going to come out of that, where you're going to actually get to a place where we're doing computational analysis of our repeated workflows to make it so that software itself gets more efficient, irrespective of its packaging and deployment modality.
Yeah, definitely, actually, but we also know that the bigger systems, even if you're running at 80% of the capacity, let's say you have 20% extra all the time. Like, they don't publish these numbers. Nobody does that. Just assume that they're running at 80%. But most of the enterprises are running at
11.
They have more than 50%, unused capacity.
10-12% gross utilization is a kick-ass number in a big enterprise.
Yeah, in the big enterprise, like 20. Let's say 20 to 30. Sure. Even if you're 30, you're freaking awesome. And overall, we are talking about including the storage and the compute total, right? So it's a lot of wastage when you do it on your own. But you go from, let's say, 20% to, let's say, 30% to 70 or 80%, huge numbers. Sure. And when we spend money in trillions of dollars every year on these things.
But our metaphor about it is all wrong, right? Like, are the roads in the United States wasted when they're not all full of gridlocked cars? No, that is not waste. That is how the system's supposed to work, right? You're supposed to have a bunch of open roads to be able to use, and they're best when there's quite a bit of space between the cars so that they can all move through quite quickly. There's if the biggest impediment to innovation is the ability to apply a human talent to problems, then the utilization of a bunch of silicon that we have organized in a specific way is not all that interesting a problem. We need to organize all of the stuff, not just for developer efficiency, but operations, people efficiency, business analysis, right? Like, the functional model, I think, is incredible for developers mentally. It's impossible for our analysts and accountants to keep track of. There's no way for them to be able to predict or figure out what these things cost. So I think that there's a model where we're going to move to a more holistic accounting of the people costs associated with any enterprise because of how accountable the technical costs are. Those two are going to interplay with each other. You're starting to be able to model the human costs associated with these pieces. I mean, we spent a bunch of time with teams where their consumption of cloud doesn't change all that much, but they use the DORA model to change the way they do software development, and ta-da, they're much more efficient. They use less staff time. They can get more infrastructure design work done. So there's a bunch there where the interplay between the smart folks and the technologies that they leverage are going to be more important than any one of those buildings.
Oh, definitely. Actually, I have a sort of thinking frame or talking frame, if you will. There's economics of the software creation on the left side and economics of the software operations on the right side. That's how I see the overall systems, if you will. So on the left side, number one cost is the developer cost, and developers are pretty expensive. The laptops, you get the one of the best laptops for $2,000 to $3,000. It has shelf life of 2 to 3 years, but developer is like $100K plus, right? So, and you need multiple
the tools for developers are an irrelevant cost in comparison to the staff costs.
Developers,
they should, like, if you're in over there in the CFO's office, stop measuring it. It's useless. Give them whatever laptop they want. I promise they cost you more per hour.
Exactly. So developer productivity is paramount on the left side, and And the efficiency of the infrastructure is paramount on the right side. Actually, it's very important, and we have brought.
I've got a lot of places where a MongoDB operations person is a $180,000 a year experienced professional. And they're not using Atlas, which manages Mongo for you. And you go like, okay, how much better is that $180,000 an hour person? Aren't there problems that you as a business have that they could use this smart, analytical, creative, technical, all the capabilities that person has to work on a problem your customers actually have, as opposed to a sort of basic operational problem that has now been successfully solved? There are plenty of other operation problems that are not packaged by product companies yet, that are multi-product, that are multi-cloud, that are multidisciplinary. That's where I think most of the sophisticated engineers are moving, because they're going to be the hardest problems to be run to ground as pure products from pure software companies. So you're going to have a persistent opportunity to earn great, salaries.
Totally agree. Totally agree. I usually say that cloud runs on the two basic economic principles: economies of scale and division of labor. That's a sophisticated way of saying that. Specialization. So people specialize in certain areas, and they work day in, day out in those areas, and they innovate in those areas, right? So you can't a smaller system, if you will, or as a company, you're a system, right? You can't compete with that kind of innovation from those specialized functions at these bigger systems, if you will. Yep. So what else? So I also talk about that. People talked a lot about data gravity, and for the last 2-3 years, have started to talk about the skills gravity. I think I usually say that skills gravity is as important as the data gravity. So you can't leave a vendor, in this case, the cloud service provider, because your people are skilled in that, and then to skill people on other cloud, it takes a lot. So what's your take on that?
We run into that a lot, because there are a bunch more people that know AWS than know GCP. As one of the ones I wrote the first AWS solution. I wrote a bunch of the stuff that was a part of the beginnings of the Well-Architected framework. So I really got how big of a lift it was to teach what were exclusively colo and data center operations professionals what in the heck cloud even was, why it was so different, how much of the workload shifted to the cloud provider, where the risk differences were, how you did design work. The architecture work was really, really critical at that step. And we taught thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of engineers how to do this stuff. When I've taken folks that are at AWS and come over to GCP, it's only that sort of 7 or 8% of difference between the two platforms that they have to incrementally learn about. I think most businesses, when they look at it, go, shit, it's going to be as big a transition as it was from data center to AWS. And I have to remind them, like, no, 90% of that was data center to cloud. And then there was this 5, 7, 8, 9, 10% that was the specifics of AWS's cloud, as different from the specifics that are everywhere else. And now there are some companies that have maybe gone way further into way earlier abstractions from Amazon. Like if you just welded yourself to Elastic Beanstalk and you love it. I love the Beanstalk guys. They did a great job. That is weird and it doesn't run anywhere else. And you're going to have to do a little bit of more unplumbing. But every company that I talked to didn't. They're either EC2 or they're Lambda. And both of those are pretty damn equivalent to the equivalent products in GCP or in Azure. So I spent a bunch of time together with Peter Mark Burward, who works on my team now here at Sada. We wrote GCP for AWS professionals. It's the little manual so that you don't have so much work to try to figure it all out from scratch. And so for most businesses, the move to the second cloud is a way tinier step. It's just that incremental difference. Now, there is a big gravity in their existing investments in automation. They already wrote 400,000 lines of Terraform code that talks AWS, or worse, they used Amazon's proprietary CloudFormation. I'm the one who wrote the first public CloudFormation template, so I'm sorry, everybody, I screwed you over. We should have done something in the open source. But there's a lot where that kind of investment is a place where you should expect future deal making in the cloud providers or others to offset the costs that are associated with transforming those materials. And I do think that there are big opportunities for little software ISVs to turn on transformation between these two different types and making it so that more of this stuff is easy to switch from one to the other. We're watching big investments on that in the kind of data migration space. So like Packet Fabric, grinding down the costs on networking. We helped with the guys at VirtuStream and Stream with 2 eyes, and there's a bunch of other different tools that are used to grind the databases back and forth. That can be a big sticking point for a lot of folks. Once the data is moved, you're generally in pretty good shape.
Yeah. Actually, data has huge gravity, as you said.
Well, it's like, and that's my point, is that like I think that gravity has shrunk a lot, like by a factor of 6.
Because
right, like
movement.
Yeah, it just got cheaper.
And on that note, actually, the concept of what Dave Vellante and John Furrier and the Cube guys and few others, like we had that sort of a short whole day almost talking about the what we call super cloud, or the systems built on top of the CSPs, our public cloud providers, right? That's MongoDB, that's Snowflake, like the data systems, if you will. Well, it's another abstraction layer on top of the providers. What's your take on that? Like,
sure. I wrote an article about it a while ago, and I got to interact firsthand with the folks at Goldman Sachs under George Lee, who's an incredible CIO. They have spent, I don't know how much money, like tens, maybe even into the hundreds of millions of dollars, in an internal platform called Sky that allows their developers to consume Azure and AWS and GCP and everything else that they feel like as an integrated system, which it provides credentialized control and governance and routine management and operations oversight and, right? They're audited, they have SOX compliance requirements. Yeah. They're not going to turn on anything if they don't have clear control over it. And Sky provides that control. It is a utterly proprietary first-party product they paid an absolute catastrophe for because they're rich. They got a bunch of money. They got a bunch of developers, and this problem is real for them. They're not going to get out from underneath it. And I don't expect 99% of businesses are so totally nuts as to today to vaporize however many hundreds of millions of dollars worth of development work that Sky represents. But next year it's 10 million. The year after that, it's going to be about 1 million. A couple years after that, it's going to be a couple 100,000. As these services matriculate downward in open source products over time, you will get to a place where administration of more than one of these things is going to feel fairly straightforward. And I think Kubernetes and Anthos are going to be critical ingredients. Those have reached critical mass. There's no reason why somebody even starting tomorrow to jump into doing something like this would opt for an alternative API to that. But I think that there are commercial software opportunities to bundle that up in a way that is really compelling for customers. I think a lot of that will include things in the sort of cost control and cost management area, because that's going to be a real focus for customers over the short term. And it's a great lever to get the CFO bought into an investment in tooling in a way that I think will unlock the kind of cyclical investment required to boss these things around. I think the smart cloud providers will build it themselves and be the place where customers consume that capability. I think it's most likely to come not from the number one provider because, well, they have less incentive to do it than the others do. So I think it makes all the sense in the world to expect that the Googles and the Alliuns and the rest will be making investments in this area.
Well, those are great points, actually. Miles, another sort of thing I usually talk about, like I want some your viewpoint or clarity from you about this topic as well, because you're a deep thinker, I can tell. So is that there's a term I have sort of put out there, it's feature proximity. So when you are doing one thing and you want to do another thing, you're doing data analytics the old way, the cubes and all that stuff, now you want to do the data analytics using data science, ML, AI kind of stuff. Where do you go to get that extra feature? Like how far that is with the proximity of feature from feature to feature. And that goes into the breadth of services with a provider. And lately, actually, as of last 6 months or so, I have added the component of marketplace to that sort of concept as well, because marketplace actually increases that feature proximity. If a vendor a cloud provider doesn't have certain things, but their people
Marketplace
in the
does.
marketplace, they might have that, best of breed, if you will. So you don't have to compromise, if you will, with the cloud provider. You can go best of breed. What do you think about that concept? And also, what do you think about the concept where Google Cloud, just hypothetically,
Sure.
Google Cloud Services sitting in Amazon's cloud marketplace and vice versa? Will that be
Sure.
possible in future, you think?
Let's do both of those separately because I
Mhm.
think they're worth it on their own. I think you're exactly right that that customers are trying to compose the end-to-end solution for whatever set of problems they're working today. I think we are much closer than we have ever been to being able to hire senior IT leaders from big companies that are representative of their sector and saying, what is all of your needs, right? Like, how do we get the whole list of all the stuff you're trying to do in your bank or in your hospital or in your retail shop or the rest of that? And one of the things that happens when you take that on is you recognize that those verticals are defined in an immensely broad way. I had an incredible
Yeah.
meeting. I'll give a shout out to these guys. We have a great relationship with the folks at NVIDIA, and they brought this team. They're like, we're from the verticals team. I go, great. Is it going to be about finance or marketing? And they go, no, we're focused on stadiums. And I go, what? And they're like, yeah, sports stadiums. I go, okay. Like, I mean, I get that there are some sports stadiums, but like, this is your vertical? And they're like, yeah. Like, here are how many stadiums there are. This is how many GPUs they're going to need to do these 87 different workflows that are a part of optimizing the experience in a stadium. Here's how much ROI there is associated with that. They have all the enablement, all the technical. I'm like, my mind is blown. So I think many of the cloud providers, if they're sharp, are going to start to turn their model upside down. The beginning was about building primitives and capabilities and
Horizontal.
functions, and here's all the stuff you need to build anything. Pretty quick, you're going to get to the particularly boring companies that don't want to take any of that risk or do any of that experimentation. Say, I just want to buy the thing that does my thing, and you're going to have to compose all of that on their behalf. And Azure's probably closer to this than most of the rest of them. They've been oriented that way as a business for a much longer time. So I think that's a place where Amazon is doing a bunch of catch up to chase after the verticals exposure that Azure has. I think Google is starting to do the same thing. So we're working together with a team in their learning platform product. That's an incredible initiative. There's a whole bunch of work that's being done to help in healthcare, kind of happening in parallel with the Verily teams. That's incredible stuff. So it's places like that where when the cloud providers bring the Herculean muscle of their innovation machine and literally directly apply it to specific categories of customer problems, I think is when the real magic happens. To date, that has mostly been done by acquisition.
Yeah.
They'll just buy somebody that's solving that thing and cram them into the platform and see if they can sort of cobble that together. I don't think that's going to go far enough in the short term. Now, to your second point, which I thought was a great question, I don't expect that you're going to buy GCP in the Amazon marketplace, but I definitely think the end-to-end composed stadium solution that is NVIDIA and GCP and Disguise and 15 other ML things, and it's been reduced to a product and has an end SKU, I think that thing you'll get listed in Azure, in Amazon, because some customer over there will be pissed that you don't already have it. And Amazon will just want to capture the margin associated because they're a seller at the end of the day. They're a retailer. They are a retail company. So if anybody is going to stick it in a marketplace, it is going to be Amazon that does it. And they'll probably do it first. I expect also sub products that are hugely differentiated, right? I mean, BigQuery obliterates Redshift regularly with ease. So of course they're going to want to see that in the marketplace so they don't attrit customers to third-party locations, right? The last thing I think Amazon wants to see is this stuff run off and sit on Databricks or Snowflake or something where now it's much more likely that it could just get picked up and moved off of their platform. The BigQuery Omni environment runs on AWS. So Amazon's not pissed. They're making the revenue anyway. So that's the kind of stuff that I think you're going to see a bunch of strategic work and policy controls work in the marketplaces so that the cloud providers can say, no, I keep the revenue, it has to stay here. That stuff is going to be where I think a bunch of the fun legal and policy and contractual obligation pieces are going to get noodled out over the next couple of years.
Yeah, that's another whole separate discussion.
Yeah, yes it is.
The contractual obligations, SLAs, and passed on SLAs and nested SLAs and
Sure.
the nested billings and support. And it's a very hairy sort of game on the back end, if you will.
Well, and I really imagine, like, if you're, I think about it like, like the Shopify folks, or what's another good example of these guys? Any of the businesses that are in a specific vertical, that are just a member of that vertical, but got religion early, right? Like a customer of ours is Signature Bank. They're a bank. They're just like a bank, but they have rebuilt themselves internally, utterly cloud-oriented in technology, built on a bunch of blockchain tech. They have all of this sophistication. They're going to be so far ahead in comparison to the other major banks. And at the same time, so aware of the complexities and the nuance and the specifics that banks need as customers. I think a lot of them are going to want to pivot and flip over and become service providers to the other banks, to their competitors, with the stack that they have assembled. It seems obvious to me that a whole bunch of early movers in the verticals will become the ISVs for those verticals.
Yeah, that's a very interesting observation, and Goldman Sachs is doing that. We actually, long time back, almost 13 years, around 13, 15 years back, when we were starting about cloud, all the different consumption models and types of, like cloud, if you will, there was a community cloud concept, which was the vertical focus, right? So insurance industry will have their own cloud, and they will have their own taxonomies built in and the APIs and everything, but still not there. Hopefully,
I think where that broke down is people were trying to conflate. I want a homogeneous risk pool, right? Like I want everybody that's crazy about regulatory compliance, all the banks all in one pile, so that everything has to be managed to this crazy high level of regulatory oversight. And then all the like nut bar startups, they can be over here at the low regulatory oversight. Yay. Now we have different cost profiles. But I think the challenge with that is those groups have simultaneous infrastructure peaks, right? Like all the banks have end of month grinds that they must produce, and that's when their spikes in compute happen. And so they're all going to contend for the same resources. If you could all work together in software, and have all of that definition and semantic work and the structural levels that makes it so that you can consume, if that was divorced from the physical infrastructure, where I can say, okay, Google has to run at this SLA with this kind of reporting transparency, with all the rest of this, and all the rest of the clouds, they have to be held to that same account. Then you could really innovate together as a group. But I don't think most of the pure verticalized industries put enough money into technology in the first place to be able to contribute to something like that. Right? Like, how are they supposed to give? It's not going to work.
And actually, there's also conflict of interest in a way.
What do you mean we're going to go help my competitor? That sounds terrible.
Yeah. Right? Like, where will the differentiation come from? Like, if I'm Goldman Sachs, like why I'm helping another big bank, with my technology, like you have to have the differentiation there.
And that's why you've seen a bunch of, I think, very healthy collaboration at the more cross-cutting horizontal tools, right? Like everybody can contribute to, making it so that MySQL is more reliable, because that benefits a huge number of different entries, and I don't have to like necessarily imagine I'm specifically screwing myself over with a competitor. But I do think that there's, I think if you think of it more about a standard, like a standards body, especially around the data and data analytics and governance, and like those are problems that, the security stuff, like all that stuff that doesn't change business to business, and on which no customer is going to buy you because, right? Like they're just going to not buy you because you failed in those areas. There's no like, I'm even more secure, and so you pick me as a bank. There's just, oh, you're the one who got hacked. Okay, I'm not picking you anymore as the bank. It's only risk to them. So I think that incentivizes them to work together in a standards-based way.
Yeah, I was so glad to see there's some security, security lake, open.
CIS is a good example. CIS 7, that's
open
been
framework. Those standards actually. Those are actually started by Splunk, but then these other guys are taking credit for it a little bit more than they needed to. But anyways, there are standards, right? And then I actually I'm very hopeful that we'll have standards on the data side and data taxonomy side and data mesh side, or just data fabric side, whatever term you pick. There should be some standards for interoperability between the different cloud providers. I think we need that as industry, and we lack that big time actually. And then it costs us collectively a lot more money to develop and operate these technologies, right? So yeah, great discussion. We can keep going, I guess, with these topics.
Yeah.
Anything you want to mention, your key observation in the last few months or couple of quarters, or what you project 2023 will bring? And by the way, I didn't ask you about your intro, which I bet people out there know you already, like who you are. You're CTO at Sada. If you can give like some high level Sada pitch, if you will, like what do you guys do and how you guys help enterprises, that would be good.
Sure. I'm Miles. I'm CTO at Sada. I've helped about $7 billion in public cloud consumption between AWS and GCP. Sada is Google Cloud's largest and most effective resale and implementation partner. We've helped in 1,000 successful projects in just the last 2 years migrate some thousands of customers to GCP, including a commitment to Google of over $2.5 billion of that work over the next 3 years. We are almost 900 geeks that just dive into big businesses, healthcare and retail and pharma and finance and every different kind of company you've ever heard of, and a whole pile of startups to help them be successful with what is one of the most game-changing technologies in the world.
What's your background? Like, you have done a lot of work, and like you said, for a long time.
So I've been here for 3.5 years, which has been rad. I did 5 years at Google Cloud in the first 150 employees there. We had an offsite in Sonoma where my band played. That's how small it was at the beginning. I came to that from AWS and the first 150 folks there. I was on the same floor with Jassy and Salivsky and Werner, and everybody had to, I had to do make sure I played tuba solos for Werner. He liked that a lot. Before that, I built a bunch of startups. I built a social media technology company and thing in insurance prediction management and all sorts of crazy stuff. So long time in technology, just eager to help people use all this crazy stuff.
That's awesome. Actually, it's a weird kind of interview that I'm asking for the introduction at the end, which might be interesting. But I may actually put that in the beginning. We'll see. Sure. I hate editing, by the way.
Well, in editing, enjoy it. Yeah, it's gonna be great.
No, there's no edit on this almost. So what do you think about 2023 will bring? Just high level.
Sure. We're all hopeful to see some of the supply chain pressure and the macroeconomic dynamics. I'm here to see a peaceful resolution in Ukraine. I would love to see a little bit of normalcy on the pandemic front, although the tridemic, or what they're calling it now, has certainly got us all freaked out. I think you're going to watch every company everywhere rotate to much shorter returns for their investments. They're going to rotate to needing to extract more data and more value from the data that they have. And they're going to be really, really engaged in what's changing in their workspace as all of this new technology comes to bear. We just started dealing with everybody being remote at work. I happen to be in the office today. This is like the first time in months. So it's certainly a place where as the whole of all of the businesses that we interact with continues to evolve, getting better at change is going to be a persistent differentiating advantage. So we're seeing a lot of companies try to figure out how to, of their few investments that they make, to invest in accelerating their own internal rate of change. So there's a lot that technology can do to help with that. That's one of the places my company's focused. So I'm looking forward to helping them out.
Yeah, actually, I wrote a tweet, but then I didn't do that. I thought it would be too touchy-feely, but I'll say that here. That I think that the cloud has started to feel like ERP-ish, like very complex in nature. And the partners, without partners, you can't really consume the cloud in a meaningful way without somebody in the middle who knows that, stack inside out, if you will, because as a typical enterprise, you can't learn all that intricacies, and you need another specialization layer below the CSPs, cloud service providers, right? And then you company like yours and many others provide that. I think that it goes a long way, and people who have, of course, like done it time and again, built it, the quality of talent at any company matters a lot, be it a CSP or a partner of a CSP. I think it matters a lot, and you guys provide a great value in that sort of arena. So with that, thank you very much, Miles. Always pleasure to talk to you. And we should do a few other talks like this on like deep dive into maybe networking and or storage or some other areas. And
no, there's incredible stuff happening at both the hyperscaler and the ISV layer. Love to talk shop.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it. Happy holidays.
Talk soon. Bye.
Bye. So, okay, I'll stop recording. Stop. You want to recording?
Oh, no,